What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York, calling from the quarantine zone again, and this time we got Lucas of Völur. Thank you so much for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to be with you.
Yep. It's so great to have you here. I was actually just jamming the new album Death Cult, scheduled to come out November 13th. I really want to know what the thought process was making this. Was there kind of like a preconceived idea of how you wanted Death Cult to sound like, or was this more or less kind of like a improvising or a very organic process?
It's kind of a mix of both. I've had these ideas in my head for a long time about this kind of like series of 4 records, and we did kind of like based on we do a lot of stuff in like Northern mythology and Norse stuff and like Germanic mythology. So I was thinking a lot about the idea of like worlds in that, and that, you know, everyone knows, or not everyone knows, but there's this concept of like the 9 worlds in Norse mythology. But I was thinking about like kind of a different take on that, and how societies used to exist, and things were like more divided. Like, so how to best explain it? So like the idea was we're gonna have the first record, which was about the world of women, the second record about the world of men, because some theorists talk about like people living in like kind of separate worlds, men and women, especially back then. And then the third record was supposed to be about the gods, the world of the gods, and then the fourth record is supposed to be about the world of like the spirits that inhabit the land. And this recent record, Death Cult, is about the gods. That third record I was speaking of, but it was the least kind of fleshed out in my mind musically and kind of thematically. And so, like, we had one song written for it. Like, I've had a bunch of songs written for the next record that's about land spirits, written for a while, and that's kind of like got a definite shape in my head. But this one was the least fleshed out. And when it came time to start writing it, you know, I was thinking about like the gods and whatnot, and you know, the idea of like kind of like Wagnerian stereotypes and those kind of things didn't really appeal to me. So I kind of went on a different route, if that makes any sense. So it is a bit more improvised as well.
And being that, because reading about you, I know that Norse mythology is definitely a subject matter that you always tackle, and you have these different worlds that you address. Obviously, you know, these concepts determine the outcome of the lyrics, but has it ever determined the outcome of the music itself, too? Like the instrumentation?
I mean, like a little bit. Like, I try not to let it, you know, like, completely control everything. You know, you don't want it to be like full program music. You know, like there was a time when I was interested in that. Like Shostakovich, I think his second symphony is like a full bit of program music about the Russian Revolution, and it kind of follows the timeline of that. And it's cool and everything, but it can feel a little forced. So I like to kind of let it guide the lyrics and let it guide the mood, but try to serve the song and the piece before anything else.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that if somebody is just discovering you on Death Cult, or, you know, people are just getting on board with you guys now, do you feel like maybe they would have a better understanding of this record if they go back and listen to records such as Ancestors or Desir or something like that? Like, are your albums kind of like Lord of the Rings? Should they be listened to chronologically?
I mean, I hope people don't compare it to Lord of the Rings and that they're long and dense, you know. But no, I think actually this one is like a good kind of like introduction to like the idea of the band, because it's, to my mind, it's like our most kind of like distilled version of it, where there's all these kind of like styles and compositional approaches kind of thrown in together, but it feels a bit more streamlined, a bit more organic than the last one. I'm proud of the last couple records, but I feel like we've really kind of like honed in onto what we want to do. Like the last record was pretty ambitious and big, and I'm proud of it. But I think it was maybe a bit too heavy for some people, a bit too much of an ask.
Well, I think your music, some artists don't like this label, but I consider Valor's music to be kind of like experimental in a way. Like you
Yeah.
incorporate so many different elements, so I'd imagine just trying new things is almost like part of your artistic exploration, right?
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. Like experimenting's a big part of it. You know what I mean? We want to kind of always sound different and bring different elements in.
hmm And you mentioned that like you've had these ideas for death cults sort of floating around for a while. Is what we're hearing on this album how these songs were originally recorded, or being that you've had these ideas sort of like around for a long time, did these songs maybe change a lot over a span of time?
Well, like I think I said it's we only had one song written for this record, so they. Well, it's actually interesting. They kind of existed in a state of limbo for a while. For whatever reason, we had one song, the Frey and Death Cult, which is the first song on the second side, was written, and then pretty quickly, over a course of about maybe a year, I wrote the other three, and they were all kind of like in a unfinished state for a long time, and then Laura and Justin and I actually went and did like a country retreat and rented someone's garage and worked on the songs for about 4 days straight, you know, every day just like getting up, going into like the garage and just working on them. And that's when we kind of like hammered them down to be done, because they were always kind of like a little more jammy, if you can if you can believe it. And then of course, like, another big part of it is that some of the songs have like these orchestrated sections, so they existed in like a Sibelius MIDI file, you know, and you know they kind of sounded like shit, and it was like it's a kind of test of faith to kind of go in and be like, no, we're gonna have the cello and the piano and this guy kind of record over it, and here's what it sounds like, and you play it back from the MIDI file, and it's like beep 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 beep, you know, and it doesn't sound very good.
Wow.
So, yeah, and then so you kind of have to go in, you know, trusting your compositional instincts, and then to know and to trust the players. You're like some we hired a cellist, and then oh fuck, I guess I played all the keyboards and stuff on it as well. So you have to trust your keyboard player, who in this case is me, and to kind of pull it off, and trust Laura to play the violin and the viola parts. And then when you're listening back, it was like this huge relief to be like, okay, it doesn't sound ridiculous. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, tackling the concept of like all these elements of mythology, you know, it's a subject matter that's been addressed through a lot of forms of music. One thing I was curious about, though, is there maybe any vestige of your personal lives or your personal experiences also expressed through your music as well?
Yeah. I think that's definitely a part of it. This one, I mean, like, to take a step back, what my kind of original goal with the group was to like make music that captured the feeling of reading either like mythology or like fantasy books or things like that, and this kind of like, especially with the mythology, the old poems and whatever, there's this odd ethereal feeling, and like, you know, nothing makes sense to our ears. So I kind of wanted to maybe like pull a bit of that out if possible. But then again on this record, so that's like the personal experience, like reflecting, you know, a personal feeling and try to like bring it out to other people and share that with other people. And then on this record, it's, I guess, technically our most political one, if you can call it that, because it's kind of like an environmental call, if you will. The god at the center of it, the goddess at the center of it is Nerthus, the goddess of the earth, and it's kind of about how these rituals conducted in like a vacuum, you know. Meanwhile, while the entire earth is fucking burning around you, and then you're like kind of like worshiping this earth, you know, the goddess of the earth, but it's not doing anything. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Definitely. I think you're able to kind of like inform a listener on the original story, but I think the music is also open to interpretation enough where people can relate to it in their own matter, and maybe they could feel like they're getting to know you as well as an artist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
As when it comes to that creative spark, in order to get inspired to write, do you almost need to put yourself in a certain place in order for the inspiration to come through, or does inspiration sometimes strike out of nowhere?
Yeah, I'd say it. I mean, for me, it definitely it strikes out of nowhere, and I work in I guess if it's I work in a thematic way. So I like to write themes and then expand on those, and I find that it seems that the themes come when you're least expecting it. A theme will come when I wake up at 5 in the morning, can't get back to sleep, or 4 in the morning or something, I can't get back to sleep, and then there's all of a sudden a theme in my head. But the development of the theme, the kind of orchestration, that's all work. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you kind of sit there, play the song by yourself for weeks and weeks, play the song as a band for weeks and weeks, and then also I like to leave holes in the music so that Laura or Justin can fill them in. So I'll come in with a theme, maybe a slight development, and then Laura, I'll say Laura, what's a good counter melody for this, or what's the melody to go on top? Or Laura will come in with a riff, and I'll write the chords or write a melody on top of that. So I like to make it collaborative as well. But it's definitely a mix of what is it success is 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration, or whatever they say, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
It's all well and good to have a great idea, to have a cool riff, but if you don't put in the work to make it interesting, then you got nothing, right?
Yeah, well, you led me perfectly into the next question, actually, because, as an artist, we're always questioning things, and we're always, wondering, would this make a good concept to, make into an experience? So, I'm really, how do you know when you come across these themes, how do you know that you need to make it as an album, to incorporate it into your music?
If it gets stuck in your head, that's kind of the big thing for me. If you can write a bunch of stuff and and maybe write a throwaway riff, and if you're not walking around at work or whatever, and all of a sudden you're humming your own riff, then it's if you're not doing that, then it's no good, I'd say.
Yeah, fair enough. And here comes the most difficult question: how do you know when a song is done?
I can't remember who said it. Some filmmaker was great films aren't finished, they're abandoned.
Yeah, I get that all the time. And a different person who quoted it every time as well. So
yeah, it's I don't know. I think I heard George Lucas quote somebody quoting it.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, when it's hard because half of the for a band like us, part of the writing also takes place in the studio, right?
Yeah.
But I guess I do like to have a version that we can play just as the trio, because I want to be able to play it live. And so when a song is done, I guess it's when you feel that there's no empty space, unless empty space is part of the composition, right?
Yeah, how many albums have we heard where the last 2 minutes of the songs are just dead silence?
Or they just play the riff over and over and over again and fade out, right?
Yep, and it sometimes works very well, and other times it pisses a lot of people off.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, what's funny is do you try to enjoy, or do you try to engage the listener into the story of the album, or do you feel that your music is also very open to interpretation?
I think it's definitely open to interpretation. I wouldn't want to. I think the narrative nature of it, if you kind of base it around a narrative, in that kind of loose way I was talking about, it will create a narrative sounding song with tension and release and build up in that, and I think that's enough to draw somebody in. And then I like the idea of kind of unearthing extra layers if you want to go there. You know, if you want to sit down and read the lyrics or read an interview and that kind of thing, you can maybe enjoy it on a heavier level than if you want to. But like, I think it should stand on its own just as music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like, and not to discredit like the vocals by any way, shape, or form, but like I think that the music is just as strong at conveying emotion and conveying imagery as much as the lyrics do. I feel like the music itself acts as a form of narration.
Yeah, we're not, and like the other part of that is like, you know, we're all trained instrumentalists. Like Laura and Justin and I met at Humber College, like studying music, instrumental music. So we're not like, none of us are like singers, you know. So like our first instinct is to always go for like a compelling instrumental piece, and then for us, I think like vocals can be even like an extra instrument on top of that, as opposed to like our, you know, virtuoso performance or what have you.
Mm-hmm. Being that you're classically trained, I love asking. There's a lot of metal musicians who are classically trained, and like kind of putting yourself in maybe your teacher's positions or any of like the most classical snobs. If they were to listen to your music now, like how would they feel about it? Is like your classical training like demonstrated in there? Do you think about the theory that you learned, or do you feel that maybe you had to abandon some of the technical training?
Well, actually, we weren't. Laura's maybe the only one of us who's actually like classically trained. We all met at jazz school, actually, which is like, it's like a hybrid. You know, like the model that Humber, the school that we went to, the jazz school, uses is like, you still read, you still learn orchestration. You know, you learn all that like technical stuff. Like I played the upright bass, you know, on the bow, but I was doing, you know, you're learning how to improvise, you're learning jazz standards and whatnot. So it's a slightly different approach. I had to teach myself actually some of the classical things, and learning how to like write for, you know, a small ensemble. That wasn't like a small, like a ensemble with like cello and piano and whatnot. So like the interesting thing is that I know at least in Toronto, in the classical world, the world of composition is like very open-minded and very like shit is out there. You know what I mean? Like people are doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So like, had we studied composition, I think a lot of guys would think it was cool. At our school, I think people listening to it would, you know, maybe criticize the tones. You know, people don't like they don't really like heavy music unless it's like kind of performatively. What's the word I'm looking for? Like it's virtuosic. You know, a lot of jazz guys don't give metal a lot of credit unless it's like very odd time signatures, like Tool. Like Tool's one of the only jazz metal bands that gets respect in the jazz world.
Animals as Leaders, I think, is another one.
Yeah, something like that. You know, so I think like they'd listen to it, they'd appreciate what we were doing, our teachers, but they would say, you know, oh, it's not my thing. I prefer, you know, I don't know, fucking Michael Brecker or something like that. But everything I learned at school was useful for me in the production of all the music I've made, because at that school, at least, they teach you like how to play in a band. They teach you like how to groove, how to sound good, how to write music, read music, and if you don't get like caught up in thinking that bebop is the ultimate form of music, then, you know, like stylistically, you can go anywhere with that.
Yeah. Now, it's funny, too, that you had the jazz training, because jazz, when that first came, jazz was the freaking Cannibal Corpse or the Aborted of their times when it first started. People were calling that shit devil music. And I don't know if this is really the best analogy. You're the classically trained one, so correct me if I'm wrong. I've always said that jazz music was pretty much like the bridge between what we would get from classical music into rock and roll.
Yeah. Like those, like, you know, it's like rock and roll is a very and rock and the rock tradition that we know is a very specific thing. It doesn't function on the same rules that classical does, but jazz is kind of somewhere in between. And jazz, classical used to have a lot more improvisation in it than it does now. It's very standardized and very rigid, but it used to be kind of a little more open, a little more up to the performer, and a lot of those jazz guys, especially in the 30s and 40s, like Duke Ellington, and then later on with Eric Dolphy, who's a big influence, and Charles Mingus, they were bringing in all the best parts of the Western classical tradition, like writing scores, the kind of really seriously complex harmonies and atonality, and mixing it all together. So it's not, it's not as they're not as separate. There's not a stone wall in between classical and jazz like I think there is between the rock tradition and the Western classical tradition.
Yeah, but it'll eventually all come full circle.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're saying?
We're all using the same notes,
Yeah.
Everything's slightly related to each other.
Yep, and we all go crazy as we succumb to the madness of creativity. Wow, I just totally winged that. I'm pretty proud of myself right now.
That's poetic, man. I like it.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Is there just anything else that you would like to promote? With the release of Death Cult, could we maybe be getting some live stream performances? Or, obviously thanks to a certain virus that shall not be named, I know shows aren't happening at the moment. But I'd imagine when this is all over, we'll be seeing you guys on the road quite a bit, right?
That's the plan, hopefully, whenever, I guess the problem is nothing. You can't really plan anything right now, Yeah. So that's people have been asking me this a lot. They're like, "What's up for the future?" I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
No plans for a live stream at the release of it, but I'm hoping we can get one of those together in the future.
Awesome.
If possible. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lucas. Everybody, we are here with Lucas of Völur. Be sure to pick up Death Cult out on Prophecy Productions November 13th. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.